Greetings, YouTube. It's me once again, Charles King. Now, I've always been a fan of the show South Park, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys are too. Now, the fact is, this show's been running since the late 90s, and it's always somehow been able to keep up on every type of topical humor there is. But there are some times I've noticed inside South Park that they eerily predict on how the world is going to be working these days. Now, what we're going to look at these days are some of my top episodes of South Park that eerily predicted the future. What we're looking at right now is an episode of South Park that deals with the first time when Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh actually shows up. Now, what I always found interesting about this episode, it actually shows on how the fact is that Christmas was always basically a big step of holiday. Now, a lot of people more or less often associated with Christianity and so forth. Now, I am not a religious person, but the fact of the matter is I always enjoyed the feeling Christmas often brought to most people. But at the same time, I've also come to realize that this is a type of episode that shows exactly on how people will sell out if they think they're not going to always reach their target demographic. Instead of actually making the thing appearing to the people who actually support the holiday or the products, they're actually going to pander to people who have nothing really to do with it. Now, in this episode, we're going to see Kyle's mom come in and argue that her son should not be in a Christmas play because he's Jewish. And at first, they were okay with making a couple of changes here or there in the story, but as it progressed, they seem to remove so much in this episode, they've completely forgotten what the meaning of the whole thing was in the first place. Now, the thing I always found interesting about this whole episode is that one can see Mr. Hanky as a metaphor for, well, basically on how people can grow out of certain things and lose the meaning behind them. Because throughout this whole episode, a lot of the times Kyle is trying to convince everybody around him that Mr. Hanky is real. But then again, who would believe in a talking piece of shit? But aside from all that, here's the next thing now. The thing I always liked about this whole episode is that it actually showed on how people will try to cut down on everything if they think it's going to make things more plausible. Because, like, here's an example, for instance. During the 1930s and 40s, Looney Tune characters used a lot of excess violence, even also in the Tom and Jerry series, where things were a lot more to the extreme. But then again, they're cartoon characters. Nothing can really hurt or kill them. As long as they draw them alive, it doesn't really matter. But people were always afraid, even back in that time period, that children would imitate what they would see back there. But a lot of times when people keep on forgetting, crime, violence, murder, rape, and all those things existed centuries before media even existed. I'm pretty sure during the time of the Crusades, or for example, even Germany's Hitler, that there were a lot of things that existed during that time period when media itself was pretty much non-existent. I mean, we only just started dealing with basic technology at that point right now, and yet somehow, even back in those days, people would assume that children are going to imitate everything they always see inside there, which is just a common myth. There is no way on earth am I going to believe for 1 second that what kids see in some of these movies and cartoons is going to make them want to be a sociopath. Listen, if your kid sees Chucky and goes out there and goes on a killing spree, yeah, I'm pretty sure he had some demons in him long before he saw that movie. But back to the main point about this episode. What I'm getting at is that at one scene inside this episode, they basically remove so much from the Christmas pageant right there that would be basically impossible to interpret this as a Christmas play in any way. And when they're done with all of this, they basically just blame each other around themselves, blame themselves. They're the ones who kept picking different things out of this without taking 1 second out thinking that maybe they've gone a little bit too far.
And now, South Park Elementary presents the happy, non-offensive, non-denominational Christmas play with music and lyrics by New York minimalist composer Philip Glass. As I turn and look into the sun, the rays burn my eyes. How like a turtle the sun looks.
What the hell is this? This is horrible!
This is the most god Hey, you're the ones who made it this way.
Yeah, it's because the Jews said it couldn't be Christian.
It wasn't our idea to take out Santa Claus.
All you bastards ruined Christmas.
See what I mean? Everybody turns against everybody when they think that they couldn't get their own way. It's sad to say that this is how things are these days. Because what was once just considered for basically entertainment has now become a cesspool of hatred and despair. Because there was something I recently heard about. They're saying they're going to make a sequel to Space Jam, but then again, was anyone really asking for it? Was anyone really asking for a sequel to Space Jam? I mean, I loved the original Space Jam when I was a kid, but as I got older, I started to realize how insane the concept really was. It was entertaining for its time, but as time progressed, I just started to realize how kind of weird it was. But back to the main point right there. One of the things I'm bringing up about this is Lola Bunny. Lola Bunny was interested as a female love interest for Bugs Bunny inside this movie. And the fact is, I loved her character for two reasons. Now, a lot of people are going to instantly assume, oh, hey, it's because she's a high, attractive woman and everything. But listen, that's just part of the situation, okay? Look, what I'm getting at is this. People are praying and hoping for strong, independent women these days, but apparently strong isn't exactly what they're really calling about these days. They're talking for these weak little Mary Sues who could barely even fight in school, as opposed to people who can actually defend themselves. Like, for example, that woman, what was her name? Gina? I always forget what her last name was, but she came in The Mandalorian, and she also came in the Deadpool movie. Now, this woman was hot and she was a physically fit woman. The fact is, she actually put in the work to be considered a strong, actual woman. And yet, what happened to her? The whole internet turned against her because the fact is, she's calling out bullshit on this cancel culture stuff. I mean, seriously, she's got a point, you know. A lot of the times when people keep on saying cancel this and cancel that, it's not because the person actually violates any rules. It's because the fact is that they can't see their own agenda actually being the main focus of it. Instead of actually creating something that people care about, all they care about is just trying to make they themselves look good, even though they know they're full of shit. Oh man. This next episode we're discussing, it's called South Park is Gay. This was a time when the term metrosexuality was becoming a popular trend back in that time period. Now, here's the interesting detail about this. What they define as a metrosexual is a person who acts homosexual but is in fact not homosexual. Now, I know I'm probably going to get a lot of flag for this and everything, but this actually kind of affects how certain things are seen these days. Now, there was once a time when when a person felt as if they were homosexual, they would say like they don't really fit the traditional norm of man with woman. And I'm saying, hey, you do you, my friend. No problem if you want to live a life like that. However, the fact is, what was once a time when people were just looking for social acceptance has become more of a trend as it once was, where people were just wanting to fit in and still be homosexual. In this case, it's like they have to be the more over the top, flamboyant type of homosexual to make a statement, where in fact they were pretty much no different than anyone else. It just so happened to like someone of the same gender. And I say, do whatever you want right there. But the fact is, this is actually showing how certain parts of gay culture seems to be, how can I put this, taking over the more hetero terms that we grew up with. The fact of the matter is, look around you. There's a lot of people right now who want to make it abundantly clear that they're gay. And I'm not talking like where they can just be gay and walking down the street. I'm talking like where they go so far over the top it seems inappropriate. Because have you seen some of the outfits they wear in gay pride parades? Some of them wearing bondage gear, BDSM stuff as well too, which is very inappropriate aware to be around children. I mean, seriously, you got men in all of these things dressed up like that in front of children, and I really don't think that's something that they should see. Now, I want to iterate a fine point that I was talking about in this. Um, I'm making sure that people know that I'm not against people living a certain lifestyle. I'm okay with that. Everyone is free to do whatever they want. It's just what I'm saying is this is kind of something that's going on in the world right now, where people who do things that are a little bit kinky and a little bit strange, that when they're doing it around kids, I seem to have a serious issue with that because some of these people are talking about things in school that really shouldn't be discussed around children. Like, for example, there was a drag queen that came to a story reading hour and say, "Do you children know how to twerk?" Yeah, they're talking about twerking to children in in kindergarten right there, and I don't think that's something you're supposed to be talking about right there when it comes to kindergartners. Even if they've seen it or something like that, it's not exactly that something appropriate to be talking about someone who hasn't even reached the first grade. But apparently, there's no real problem with that so long as someone belongs to the LGBT community, because I've noticed that they were introducing certain ideals into children who are far too young to know about sexuality, be it heterosexual or homosexual, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't be introducing sexualized ideas or concepts to children at that age. The thing I also found interesting about this episode is because it actually comes back to bite the women in a few ways in this whole episode. Now, at first, the women were all for the ideal of their husbands and their young boys actually adapting this lifestyle because it actually seemed that since they were more feminized, that they were doing things that would actually please them, like being more neat and clean and tidy and not as overly manly as some women would actually prefer. Because, hey, I didn't know what the term simp meant until around a few weeks ago, or maybe a few months at this point, but now I know. But the point is, they were all discussing saying that they wanted their children and their husband in this lifestyle because it looked like it was going well for them. But eventually it got so far out of hand, and eventually they realized that they're regretting their decision because their men are no longer really acting like men. I'm not talking about the overall me man, you woman concept, but basically they seem to have forgotten what it was like to even be men in the first place. And that's actually where a lot of things come to today because there's certain people going on out there saying that just about everybody is gay in their life or everybody is this in their life without actually discussing them. Because there was like a YouTube channel where there was this woman who was talking about gay stuff, and I'm not saying I have a problem with her doing her thing, but she was discussing these things with very, very young children, and it could be at an impressionable age. And the thing is, that's also about it is that, how could I put this? Oh, yes. She's also saying if someone has a birthday party for the child about to come out, they're going to instantly say that it's offensive to put up like, oh, it's a boy or it's a girl. Okay, the reality, the real reality is this. I'm pretty sure that a unborn child is not really going to understand gender concepts or political gendering stuff in the first place. You aren't even born. So I'm pretty sure the first thing on your mind is when you're coming out of the womb is, where is my mama's titty? I'm hungry for milk. I'm pretty sure that's the first thing that's going to be on your mind instead of, oh my God, maybe I'm gay. Oh my God, maybe I'm transsexual. Oh my God, maybe I'm non-binary. The reality, the real reality is these are just children, and the best thing we can do for them is to just let them grow and understand the world in their own time. The next thing I also knew in this episode is that Mr. Garrison also is against this whole metrosexual ideal, primarily because the fact is, in his mind, gay people wanted to be gay because the fact is, it somehow set them separately, like I mentioned, from the traditional norms. When people keep on saying man and woman, but in his mind, he really believes that being gay is something to separate him from that, not because that he feels that's right, but because he wants to step out of the trend. But unfortunately, this is the sad fate of a lot of people these days. Because I made a previous video where I discussed a lesbian author who says, and I'm quoting here, that originally she said she thought she was a tomboy, but she says that being a lesbian is the greatest achievement in her life. And the last time I checked, I thought that being a lesbian or a homosexual was like it's something that's in you. I don't think it's something that you would achieve. How do you achieve a sexual orientation? That doesn't make sense. Which is actually the sad fate of some people these days. They really think that by taking up certain lifestyles that they truly are separate themselves from the rest of the world, when in fact they're just making a fool out of themselves and only hurting their own cause. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk a bit about steroids and also when it comes to cheating in competitions. Now, here's where things get interesting in this episode. In this episode, Jimmy and Timmy are signing up for the Special Olympics and are hoping that their friends are going to come along and cheer for them. Now, throughout this whole episode, we end up finding out that Jimmy is going to be taking steroids to enhance himself in the competition. Timmy finds out about what's going on right there and tries to tell him that this is not the way in order to win the competition because he's only going to be hurting himself and also possibly hurting others in the process. But he doesn't really listen to his friend until he's already caused injury to both his mom and also his girlfriend. But that's not even the main thing that was up with this episode. Cartman inside this episode, like always, is just out for himself in this whole thing. He decides to pretend that he has a handicap in order to sign up for the Special Olympics because $1,000 grand prize in the competition. So he assumed that since these were going to be handicapped children, that he wouldn't stand a chance against them. So he doesn't really do anything to exercise or train himself. He just decided to just jump into it and assume that that was all it took to win. Think he was just going to make a mockery of all of them. What a joke. But here's where things get interesting in that detail. You see, instead of actually thoroughly examining him to see if he actually had a disability, he just pretty much let him into the competition without really doing a thorough background check on him. And tell me that doesn't kind of sound similar to what they're talking about these days when it comes to transsexuals entering competitions. There was even a bill I heard that was going around where it's saying that no one actually has to do any surgery whatsoever and can identify as whatever sex they want. That means that basically speaking, you could have anybody coming into these competitions without them doing anything to make it a more even competition. And that is a real problem with what people are going through these days because these days anybody can identify as anything without really having to pay the consequences for it. And that's just destroying the meaning of these sports in the first place. Not only is it diminishing the value of women's competition, but it actually even insults the men because a lot of these guys couldn't compete at their own level, and then next thing you know, they decide, you know what, I'm gonna join up with the women's competition. I'm just gonna crush them because when you've checked it out, so far there hasn't really been any records really broken by a female to male transsexual in this whole thing right here. But I've heard a million different stories about men going into these competitions and just destroying the competition. Them just destroying everything in the process. And when you think about it, it's actually because people are just so afraid to say something. And basically, they're just afraid to say anything because they're going to assume that, oh, they're phobic, they're bigoted, and yada yada and so forth. When the fact of the matter is, there's not always a black and a white. There's a neutral zone to this. But people want to pretend like they can't see it. They really don't take the time to actually just think for a second before they would instantly say yes to something before thinking about what could be the consequences. And that just seems to be the way how society works these days. Here we come to one of the more interesting episodes of South Park. Its name is called Mr. Garrison's Fancy New Vagina. Now, in this episode, we see Mr. Garrison is going in for sexual reassignment surgery. And the fact of the matter is, it goes about as well as what would be expected in an episode of South Park. Now, in this episode, the first thing he says is that once again they're always saying like he feels like he's a woman trapped in a man's body, and he makes sure that he knows exactly what he's signing up for. And the thing is, they actually show footage inside of this episode on what it's like to actually get the sexual reassignment surgery. And the first thing that Mr. Garrison does after getting the surgery is to go ahead in town to show off his fancy new female body and actually thinks that he's gonna have to buy all these feminine hygiene products like tampons. And the fact of the matter is, this episode kind of actually brings up a point I was talking about. Now, I'm not one to say, like I mentioned before, I don't judge how a person wants to live their life or anything like that, but there are many biological components that exist in trans women that do not exist in biological women. And you know what? There are a lot of people out there who would try to argue that statement, which just makes no sense whatsoever. No matter what they transition into, their biological components are still going to be a part of them. When a trans woman becomes a woman, they're still going to have a lot of characteristics, traits that exist when they were once male. They still have a large amount of testosterone in their body. Their bone structure is not exactly the same as females, and they do not have wombs, ovaries, or eggs. Those body parts do not exist in their body as they were originally male. And the same goes for trans men as well. Even if they have the surgery, basically it's purely cosmetic. It only exists on the surface. Their interior is still going to be exactly the same way as the day they were born. Now, I'm not going to say they're not free to be able to do whatever they want. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people who are in this ideal are thinking that not only do they not have to get the surgery, but I think if they've only had the barely any whatsoever, they can go into the exact same establishments that were put in place for the opposite sex in the first place. For example, right now, there were stories about a certain individual known as Jessica Yaniv who went to waxing parlors and also gynecologists. Now, they weren't really saying anything particular to Jessica Yaniv in this matter, saying that they didn't want to do the waxing, but they are not trained to wax male genitalia, which Jessica still possessed at the time. And everyone with common sense would know that waxing genitals is a very tricky thing. If you're not careful, it can damage the genitalia and may even require going to the hospital if done incorrectly. Now, that also applies to when Jessica also went to a gynecologist. Now, their name says it all. They're not specifically trained and studied into male genitalia. They only study female genitalia because that's their specialty of expertise when it comes to the medical field. And yet, somehow, Jessica thought that going to the gynecologist was a good idea, knowing that the person they're not trained for such a task. And as the story progresses inside the episode, one of the next thing also comes up is that he believes that since he had the surgery, that he's able to conceive a child just as any biological woman could. And I've been hearing many stories going on right now about a man who gives birth, which is not actually true because the person was a female, therefore can still conceive a child depending on how far they progress in their transitioning, but they're treating as if they were never female. They're acting as if they were always born male, which is actually contradicting what they said. They said they felt like they were in the opposite body from the day they were born, not they were born into the opposite body. So that doesn't make sense. If you feel like you were born in the wrong body, that's one thing, but you can't treat it as if you were always in that opposite body from which you're portraying right now.
With a mutilated penis. Basically, yes. Oh boy, do I feel like a jackass.
Also, a side plot inside this episode talking about how Kyle's father gets convinced that he's a dolphin in a human's body and that Kyle is a black man in a little Jewish kid's body. Now, this also is another thing that was eerily predicted inside this episode, too. Not just about transsexualism, but basically it also refers to how there's a lot of people identifying as strange things these days. There are people who identify as a blind person in a seeing person's body. There's a woman who identifies as a crippled person in a normal person's body. There are people who identify as dogs, cats, and all kinds of weird things. Now, I'm okay with some people having maybe sexual kinks or something like that, but they're genuinely actually believing that they are what they say they are. They really believe that they're a dog born into a human's body, a cat born into a human's body, and even a freaking elf. Yeah, that's right, folks. There was a woman that came up on national TV that said that she's an elf reincarnated into a human's body. And people tell me that they're not getting influenced by me these days to come up with these crazy concepts for attention. What a joke. The point I'm trying to get at to is this. Throughout this whole video, I'm not just pointing out things that involve with gay people, trans people, or something like that. I'm saying that there's so many things that are appearing in media these days that people are starting to come up with their own ideals, and it just gets crazier and crazier each day.
There was also one other episode I was supposed to put earlier in this list, but unfortunately I didn't get a chance to. This episode actually refers to one of the more controversial things that have been coming up lately in the media these days. Whether people are actually doing this by choice or whether or not these are just a few bad apples among the bunch. Now, again, like I've made sure to state before inside all of this, I hope everyone has a happy life no matter how they want to live it as. But in this case right here, it actually brings up something quite interesting. There are both two sides to this situation I like people to take close notice to. Okay, we have tolerance and we have acceptance. Fact is, two of these things are more often than not confused to be with the other, but they are not. They may have some similarities, but they're not one in the same. But that I'm getting at is in this. Throughout this episode, we end up seeing that Mr. Garrison is trying to sue the school and trying to set them up by saying that since he's a homosexual man, that if he gets fired, he'll be able to sue the school for a lot of money. But things don't go as what they expected throughout this whole episode. Mr. Slave and Mr. Garrison come up with more and more outlandish antics in order to succeed with their lawsuit, all of which failed. The fact of the matter is, there's the main thing that I've come to realize in this whole episode is that yes, there are going to be people who manipulate the system for their own personal benefit. But then again, there are actual people out there that realize that they can be able to weasel their way out of certain scenarios if they keep on playing the victim. Next episode.
You want
Like
to
I
see me,
said from
Principal
before,
Victoria?
in this
Yes, Mr.
episode,
Garrison, how
Mr.
may I help you?
Garrison gets
Mr.
rehired
Garrison,
as
some
the
time
new
ago you
teacher
asked to
for
be
the fourth
promoted from
grade
teaching kindergarten
after they
back to the
killed
third
off
grade.
Miss Chokes
I'm
on
aware of
Dick
that.
in the
You
last
want to come
season.
clean with
Yeah,
you and tell you
loyal
that
main
back then
character
some
that
of us
was.
were
But
uncomfortable with your
more to the
sexual
point,
preferences. It was
they're
really
going
just that
about
I wanted to get
apologizing for
Well, that's
firing Mr.
really great to
Garrison for
hear.
his
yeah,
sexual
as you know, the
orientation the
position of third
last
grade
couple
teacher has become
seasons.
available, and we'd like to offer you the job.
But
Well, for
unfortunately,
real?
as
You're not
he
kidding?
later finds
The
out inside this
administration see now
episode,
that you're an
saying that
individual
there
with your
was
own
another story
preferences, and
about
we
a
just found
man
out.
who
This is
was
all just
fired for
a
his
dream come
previous position
true.
as a
Principal
teacher
Victoria, I'll do a great
because he
job.
was homosexual,
We
and
don't.
then he ended up suing the
This is for
company
real. I
for
mean, I'm not gonna
about
just get fired again for
$25
being gay
million
tomorrow.
dollars.
It's for real, Mr. Garrison.
Oh, great.
With all the new laws, we could never fire you for being gay. Now you'd be able to sue us for millions of dollars.
Right. What? What was that? Hey.
His new assistant,
Hi, kids.
Mr. Slave. I'm gonna let him take over this spot right
Mr.
here.
Slave, the teacher's assistant, or as I like to write for short,
Yeah, the
the
teacher's ass.
ass.
The fact of the matter is, through this whole
Okay,
episode,
Mr. Slave,
things
go
get
sit tight. I need
progressively
you.
worse as the
Oh,
thing goes on.
Dude, I bet
Basically,
Mr.
he
Slade
keeps
got an
on
idea.
pushing the limits more and
I'm not
more
saying the
as
rest
to
of the school
what
year is going to be
exactly he's going to
easy.
get
In fact,
away
it's
with
going to
inside
be
this whole
long and
episode.
hard. Really
And the
long
thing that
and
got to me
really
the most is
hard.
that the
'Cause
parents inside
trust
this
me, they're
episode
the
are going
first
to think
thing
that
we're going
they're
to be
instantly
learning about is
homophobic just
communist
because the fact is they're
Russia.
trying to describe that their
No, yeah.
teacher
What are you
has
gonna
been
do?
doing some
No,
very
that was a bit
inappropriate things
silly, but
around them,
Get it
but
out.
because
Get
he's
it
a
out. Get it out.
homosexual, they want to assume
Hey,
that they're
did you just
just
call
being
paper airplane?
homophobic.
No, it was
And that's kind
funny.
of like a
Very
main
funny,
thing
Harry.
going on these
Tuesday.
days.
Yeah, but
They're
Mr.
saying
Slade,
that
can you
even when
imagine how
people
things
talk about
changed if
certain
you
things
got
on them to
fired?
make them feel
Yeah, that does
uncomfortable,
it.
the
I will not
first
put
thing
up
they're
with
automatically
foolishness
going
in
to
my
say is,
class.
it's
Any
your
time for
problem
punishment.
and your fault.
Take it, Mr. Slave. Oh, Oh, it hurts. I will not put up with tomfoolery in my classroom.
The first thing they're trying to do is trying to explain how their behavior in school has become quite inappropriate. The first thing they're going to say is that they're being discriminative, they're breaking them down, they're saying yada 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 and so forth. The fact is, they don't even want to take 1 second to even really think this thing through. They think that they're really trying to put these people down. So they take them to a place called the Museum of Tolerance. And throughout this whole episode, this whole thing is being blown to a proportion that even to this very day is going on right now. And the fact of the matter is, I've recently heard about a situation where a young boy was sent to the principal's office all because the fact is he didn't want to apologize for rape culture, even though he was not on trial for anything like that. I don't remember where exactly it was done. All I know is that they were asking each and every boy in the school to talk to a female and saying they apologize for rape culture, saying like all boys know each other or all boys are rapists. I've even heard even worse stories about where a mother was told to stop focusing on her young daughter and focus more on her daughter because apparently her son is a future rapist. Yeah, they use that word around a young boy, and I don't think he was even 7 years old, saying that he is a future rapist simply because he is male. When the boys go back to school, the
Okay,
first thing that
children,
Mr.
take your
Garrison
seats.
addresses inside this
Apparently
scene
none of you
is
tried to
saying
get
that
me
his
fired
father's going to try to
yesterday,
get
so
him
I
fired.
guess we're just gonna have to go
Boy,
home and
ain't
learn more
that something
tonight.
for
Now,
you.
who can tell me what
Now, the
happened to the
fact of the
water
matter
when we
is,
heated up
here
the
comes
Bunsen
the
burner?
next scene that most people really
Good
cringe
night.
at
Now,
when
if
they
we
see
take the
inside
glass
this
tube to the
episode.
Bunsen burner, we
We're
can
gonna
also
see a
steal other
scene
things from it.
where Mr. Garrison
Evaporation is an
inserts a
exothermic reaction,
gerbil
so let's look at an
inside of his
endothermic one.
assistant's
Mr. Slave,
asshole.
position 7, please. Now, I'm going to put the glass tube into Mr. Slave's tight ass. The heat from Mr. Slave's ass will act as our new conductor of energy.
Now,
Okay,
anyone
now
who can
both
really
of you
tell
lean
me
over
that
behind the
saying
winch
that
for me,
this
will
is
you?
inappropriate behavior, I don't know what is. Now, I'm not saying this kind of stuff has ever really happened
Who was the
in
first
front of
newspaper to tell you to
children,
mention there's
but
a
lately
reaction?
these days they're starting to
Now,
bring
what do
more and
you think is
more
going
of
to
these
happen when I
ideals to
introduce the
younger
element of the
children.
gerbil to
So
the
I'm talking
endothermic
about
heat of Mr. Slave's
alternative
ass?
sexual behaviors as young as even basic school. I mean, I don't really think that that's something you really want to discuss about when you're at that age and everything like that. And yet the fact is, if we heard them doing certain things like this, I bet it wouldn't even give me 2 seconds to explain why they find this as strange sexual conduct.
Hello there, children.
Hey, Chef.
How's it going?
Bad.
Why bad?
Chef, we're intolerant.
The episode where they encounter
Intolerant of
Chef,
who?
which has been
Gay
like the
people.
voice of reason
Now,
for
why do
these
you want to
kids
go
for
be
years
intolerant
right
of
now.
gay people, children? I thought
The
you
thing
knew
is,
better.
Well, we didn't think we were.
Mr. Sorry, I mean, Chef basically is a representation of a person who has a level head when it comes to knowing there's a difference between actual homosexuals and people who are basically just kinky and flamboyant, like Mr. Garrison right here. In fact, he clearly states that there's a difference between gay people and people like Mr. Garrison.
Children, there's a
But the
big
fact of the
difference
matter
between
is,
gay
these
people
days they're saying
and
they're
Mr.
all one and
Garrison.
the
Do you
same. No matter
understand?
how weird and kinky
Now,
somebody
children,
is,
just take your
as long
seats.
as they're
I'm the
gay, it
Avatar.
doesn't really matter. We end up seeing Mr. Garrison and Chef have to
Oh, yes.
confront each
Music
other
lovers may
about
have a seat.
his
Oh dear, sounds like I'm getting
inappropriate
fired.
behavior in front of the kids. And the next thing we
Mr.
notice
Garrison,
right
Chef
now,
has brought it to
the
my attention that
first
some
thing that they
students are a bit
instantly assume is once
uncomfortable about
again
certain
someone is
aspects of
just being
Christian identity.
Oh, now you're
intolerant.
firing me? Oh, well, I can't stop being who I am. I can't help the way God made me. Guess I just have to go.
No,
You
we're
see
not
what I
going
mean?
anywhere.
Huh?
You're not?
Exactly.
Chef,
You
we're
see what I
talking about
mean? The
something
first thing they assume that
Listen,
Chef
sexual
is the one with
tolerance.
the problem,
It's got to be put in
even if
place.
clearly he's doing some very inappropriate behavior. I mean, seriously, this is a sick queer, and yet
It
somehow
is a sick
he's
queer.
still seen
Chef,
as
I just
brave
wanted to
and
give you a
strong
moment
throughout
to
this whole
apologize for those
episode.
things before I sent you away, Chef.
Kiss my black ass.
The rest of this episode, the boys are sent to a place called Tolerance Camp. But when you actually take a look at it, it kind of reminds me of those Jewish death camps from back during World War II. But here's the interesting detail. The thing is, throughout this entire part of the episode, they end up getting forced into tolerance. And the fact of the matter is, I think that's also the next thing what they're trying to say right here in this part, because tolerance is good. Everyone should be tolerant. But at the same time, I'm not saying that just because people are in a minority group, you're supposed to try to instill your favoritism into them like that. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are many people across the world who have been persecuted and beaten within an inch of their life because of people's prejudices, and I'm not going to deny that. But the fact of the matter is, they keep on thinking that this is supposed to be the solution to the problem, stripping away people's freedom of choice.
Welcome to Tolerance Camp. You are here because you would not accept people's differences, because you refuse to accept the life choices of your fellow man. Well, those days are now over. Here you will work every hour of every day until you submit to being tolerant of everybody. Here, intolerance will not be tolerated. God damn it!
How'd it go?
This is unbelievable, Mr. Slave. It seems no matter what I do, I can't get fired.
The principal?
Where they're literally going to give this guy an award because the fact is he's acting so over the top and flamboyant. And the fact of the matter is, this is very inappropriate behavior for a teacher. And the fact of the matter is, this is actually something that's going on right now. Where they're saying that if people want to do these weird and strange sexual things out in the general public, they're saying it shouldn't be a problem because they're homosexual, so they were oppressed for years, so they're able to do this, they're able to do that, and that's just not how this goes. I mean, for years they kept on saying that they wanted equality, not superior treatment, and yet somehow that ended up turning into something like this. We end up seeing the
Tonight,
award
we are here
ceremony
to
where
honor an
Mr.
amazing
Garrison
fourth
and
grade
Mr.
teacher
Slave
with the
are
Courageous
ready to put
Teacher
on their
Award.
act, hoping that they'll
Herbert
finally
Garrison
be
came
able
out
to
about
get
2 years
kicked out
ago.
of
Since
school
then, he has
and
faced
sue the
adversity. He is
company. I
even
mean,
faced ridicule by
seriously,
some of his students.
this
Oh,
scene is
Randy, I'm so
just
ashamed of
unbelievable
myself.
because
It is
I
my
can
honor to
definitely
present the
see some
Courageous Teacher
similarities
Award
between the way
to
how this
Herbert
guy's dressed
Garrison.
and some of the things going on in the thing called Drag Queen Story Hour. Now, drag queens are one thing,
Get along
but I
with
don't think they need to
Slave.
be
Boys
this over
Club.
the top.
That's what our
I
boys
mean,
were
it's not
talking
even a
about.
joke. I've
Bang,
literally seen
bang,
people
bang,
have some of
bang.
these similarity looks
He is so
come and read
courageous.
to children at
Say,
a
Mr.
very young
Slade.
age and
Yes,
talking
Mr.
about
Garrison?
alternative
I had a dream
sexual
last night that you
identities.
were a real dude.
Seriously,
Really?
this is
Why did you dream
appropriate.
that I was being an
This is where
asshole?
things are
I don't
heading
know.
for
I was the
nowadays.
asshole.
Mr. Garrison has finally had enough of all of
Courageous.
this
So
and finally
courageous.
admits.
God damn it, don't you people
You
get
see
it?
what I
I'm
mean?
trying to get
He
fired
finally
here.
realizes no matter how over the top
Oh,
he
that's
goes,
courageous.
they're
Look,
never
this
gonna
kind
say
of
anything
behavior
about
should
it.
not be
I mean,
acceptable from a
listen to him in
teacher.
this speech.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
But the museum tells us to be tolerant. Yes, the museum. The museum tells us.
Tolerant, but not stupid. Look, just because you have to tolerate something doesn't mean you have to approve of it. If you had to like it, it'd be called the Museum of Acceptance. Tolerate means you're just putting up with it. You tolerate a crying child sitting next to you on the airplane, or you tolerate a bad cold. It can still piss you off. Jesus, tap dancing Christ. He's right. Our boys didn't hate homosexuals, they just hated the way this asshole was.
Now I'm gonna wrap up this portion of it so far. There are a couple of more episodes I'm gonna be looking into, because I couldn't get to fill all of them into this. But all I can say is this is quite bizarre. A lot of these episodes came out even up to over 20 years ago, and yet somehow it represents our current climate. In fact, no offense, things are getting a little bit out of hand these days. I mean, we've gone from acceptance sorry, so we're going from tolerance to full blown acceptance, and I do accept that there are different people in this world, but these days it's getting to the point where if I don't seem like I'm fully on someone's side, it's like somehow I become their enemy. I mean, okay, look, I am a person of color. There's tons of people out there that's probably gonna hate me. I know that. I accept that. But the fact of the matter is, I don't want everybody to think just because I'm a black guy, I want them to just be bending over and kissing my ass. In fact, that's another thing I'm gonna put in another episode of South Park. You know the one I'm talking about. But more to the point, anyway, look at this. We are losing a grip on everything these days. We seem to be forgetting what people really want these days. And we seem to keep on pandering to others claiming this and claiming that with anything really to back it up. But the thing is, I always found strange about South Park is that somehow, even after 20 years, they managed to keep on in the know. And I'm just shocked there's so many episodes that are representing our current climate in the world. People, let's take a message from all this before it's too late. On that note, good night.